I think when you're trying to find your way, it's often hard to know if you're on the right path. But if you're compelled by trying to make healthcare better because the current state of healthcare makes you crazy mad, you're going to be on the right path.
Hey everyone, welcome to Leadership Rounds, a podcast shining a spotlight on exceptional clinician executives thriving and driving innovation at the intersection of business and healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Reena Pandey, and together we'll explore the wisdom and insights of great healthcare executives and craft a prescription for leadership success, one candid conversation at a time. Neel, thank you so much for joining. I am absolutely thrilled to have you on the podcast. We've known each other for a couple of years, and I've just been in awe of your transition from clinician and academic to the entrepreneurial world and a policy leader. And so I'm thrilled to have you on to share your story and to be able to teach the next generations about your experience and share some of the lessons learned and maybe even the challenges faced as you've gone through your career from there to here, and also where you're going from here forward. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, you bet. The formality of this is funny because I'm used to having these conversations with you over coffee, but I really appreciate that we're broadcasting the coffee conversations that so many of us as clinicians have as we're trying to find our way here. So
I love how you've said that, because I feel like I've had with you and with so many others that experience, either a phone call or a coffee or a lunch. Just tell me about your experience. What's been hard? How did you do it? And yeah, just trying to create a more formal place for people to learn from one another, because there's so many great clinician entrepreneurs or clinician business leaders these days. And yeah, it's become my passion to really crystallize that into a formal way to help the next generation find their path to success. So I appreciate you being on. Maybe we'll just dive in. I would love to hear, maybe we just start with your path from academia to entrepreneurship. You're now at Maven. Want to hear all about that and your role. How did it come to be? How did you get from A to B, and what was the path in between?
it's probably worth starting with, I'm the son of Indian immigrants. So from New Jersey, and very predictably, as an Indian kid from New Jersey, went to medical school. But that was probably like the last predictable thing I did when it comes to the obvious career pathway in front of you versus the one that I ended up taking. Like in my case, I think like activism is Mendelian and it skips a generation, but like my parents are very like straight-laced. I don't know if that's true. Like my parents are like pragmatic immigrants, hence like medical school. But my grandparents were part of our dogs will be part of this. Sorry about that. My grandparents were like revolutionaries. They were part of decolonizing India and viewed like a very healthy respect for radical thought. So I think it's interesting because I never comfortably wore the skin, and maybe even now as like a business operator, but I've always thought of myself as like a change agent of some kind.
Yeah.
For whatever that's worth. But anyway, like I in the middle of medical school, there was a freshman senator from Illinois running for president. He had no chance of winning because Hillary Clinton was the favored candidate. The biggest fight I've ever had with my wife, we were both phone banking for our preferred candidates, which were different. And at one point she called me sexist and then I called her racist. And then we...
And you're still married to this day.
I'm still married, but it's part of the lore of our family now, how we had to like cool down.
I love it.
But it was my first startup, first ever digital campaign that David Plouffe ran. It was the first time 18 to 22-year-olds were a meaningful voting bloc. And a lot of conventional wisdom about who voted and how to win was changed. And it was like that generation of people, our rites of passage happened during the audacity of hope. Very different than the generation that came a few years behind us that had the Great Recession and all that. But anyway, so I did that. And then I bent my pathway back again, despite the success of the campaign, because pragmatic licensing exams were going to expire. And I got drawn to OB because of the fact that the Affordable Care Act planning and transition was focused on people over 65 rather than people that were my peers.
Yeah.
And like everybody, all my cousins and everybody was starting their families. And everything that CMI was envisioning for over 65ers seemed to apply to this population. And I just found it really compelling. So unexpectedly, as a man in my mid-20s, did women's health.
I love it.
Then I ended up wanting to go back home to New Jersey and hang a shingle. And then a mentor convinced me to stay and become an academic. And then in the middle of the pandemic, it probably was some amount of midlife crisis or pandemic ennui. I don't know. I've been in touch with Kate Ryder, who started Maven Clinic, since she started it. Because as a professor, you get to have a hot take. People call you and email you. And one time she called me and was like, I'm looking for our first chief medical officer.
Yeah.
That's actually how I found you, Rena, because I was like, hey, I'm happy to help you find a chief medical officer. What is a chief medical officer? But I have a take on that, which we can get into, but
Awesome.
ultimately it sounded like a job that was really cool. So that was my pattern in my career is I disrupted the path in front of me to follow people I believe in. And
Yeah,
Kate Ryder was one of them. Yeah.
that sounds so familiar to me. I have done these zigzags too. I'm here at a juncture in my career and I've been thinking, what's the next non-obvious thing that I'll do? Because at each inflection point, it's been to the people around me, a non-obvious next step from academia to able to, in my case. Yeah. And I think there's something in that. Like, I think some of us are seeking the inflection to something that isn't the typical next step. So I see that in your...
It might be a pathology. I don't know. But there is like an intrinsic, like, thriving through like growth and new things. I think like a decade into being an academic physician, like you get very comfortable in some ways. It's always rewarding. It was great to be back for grand rounds this morning and all of that. Yeah. But like being at Maven is like being in college again.
Yeah.
Being around people who are so different and learning and getting to think in aspirational ways about making the world a better place and all that stuff.
I love that. Maybe we can dig in a little bit more about the transition, because I think that's going to resonate for a lot of people that are listening in, because I felt similarly, and I don't think I could have articulated it back then, but you used the word ennui. I've used the word boredom. Like I felt the same way. I loved the program. I loved cardiology. I loved my patients. I had fabulous mentors, but about a decade plus in, it became a little rote. It was just strange. Yeah. Tell me more about that sentiment. I don't mean to poke on it so much, except that it's probably not an uncommon. There's probably some universality to that feeling.
There's something very paradoxical about being a cardiologist in one of the best hospitals in the world and feeling like it's rote. Like cardiology I know it's probably a clinician audience, but it's complicated. I don't really understand cardiology that well. Like it's complicated. It's like the people who like gravitate towards complexity and acuity and adventure. And then you get there, and even as a surgeon, and even as somebody like labor floors, like there's never an existential crisis if you're up in the middle of the night delivering a baby. I loved that about OB/GYN. It was always meaningful. And it's not that general surgeons don't care about social justice. It's just that operating on a gallbladder is different than taking care of reproductive health.
Yeah.
People wear their mission on their sleeves in OB/GYN. And in spite of all of that, I even picked it because I'm a dilettante, Rena. I picked it because I was like, you have to do some primary care, you have to do some surgery.
Yes, exactly.
I actually wrestled with giving up treating men. I still miss it. I'm getting back to it at Maven. Talk about it. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, if your doctor is being super creative, you should slowly back away. The way that we measure quality in healthcare is by adherence to protocol. There is a routine and then a rut that you can get into. And I had satisfied my yearning to seek adventure by trying to evolve that system as like a professor of public health. But there's a tension between evolution and revolution. And frankly, the pandemic radicalized me. And I moved from the evolution camp to the revolution camp. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. For me, the timing was about a decade prior in the early 2010s. But yeah, I had the same sentiment. There's so much that resonates. The feeling like, it's super complex. And yet there's some common structure and order on purpose to the day-to-day of practicing medicine. There has to be. That's quality. That's consistency. But yeah, for people that are always lifelong learners, that starts to become a little boring. I hate to say it. And clinical care is amazing, and huge kudos to those who do it day in and day out, not to diminish it at all.
I miss elements of it for sure. And there are always things to learn and all of that. And there is a culture in medicine, and particularly academic medicine, about lifelong learning and practice, because it's a never ending practice. It's not to discount any of that, but we jokingly say at Maven, one of my colleagues and I always start our meetings by asking how each other are doing, and then call in response. The answer to how you're doing is always, there's never a dull day in building a business.
Yes, so true.
It's usually a deep breath, because it can be wild.
Every day, every half hour is something different. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's jump in a little bit to the Maven experience, because I'd love for you to share your role. Like, what does it encompass? Because as I know, as chief medical officer is just a title. And frankly, unless you scratch the surface, doesn't actually tell you much. So we'd love for you to delineate that. Actually, let's start with that. And then we can dig in some other aspects.
I feel that by and large, if you meet one chief medical officer, you've met one chief medical officer. Yeah. There are things about us, as we're talking about, that are intrinsic maybe, and about mission, about how we want to work. But I think our jobs are formulated very differently. I'm now part of a roundtable that one of our investors, General Catalyst, put together of other CMOs. And we share notes. And it's very helpful that we have almost radically different jobs. Coming in and talking to you and talking to others, it seemed like there was fundamentally two kinds of CMOs, at least two phenotypes. There's outdoor cats and indoor cats. Cats are much more focused on sales, growth, thought leadership. The indoor cats are much more focused on product and operations. And it's hard, right? I think when I came, I had a profile and it made sense for me to do like outdoor cat activities. I also didn't want to be the spirit animal of Maven Clinic. Yeah. Kate took a pretty big chance on me in giving me a remit that had product and operations in it. So the way that it's formulated today, I went from a 12-person research team to something very different. I oversee the part of our product that we call our clinical product, which is like the design of our care model, the programming for high-risk conditions, that kind of thing. I don't have engineers, but I have the design team that does that.
Yeah.
I have the team that delivers the clinical services. And only recently, I think the remit of a CMO may also change over time. Up until recently, I had most of the operational components that came with it, and then centralize that, as startups often do.
Yes.
But I'm still accountable for the quality of the services to our clients and to everybody else. And then I have a team that I'm proud of my whole team, but I'm particularly proud of the existence. I have a team that we call our clinical outcomes team.
Yeah.
Which they're the ones we put our fees at risk, and they're the ones that do the actuarial modeling and true up on our contracts.
Yeah.
Also create our peer-reviewed proof points. And you might think that they're an R&D team because they sit with the CMO, but we've actually positioned them as a solution sales team.
Yeah.
Because it turns out that they're growth enabling and people do want to buy things that are proven and that work.
Yes. So. Again, it's so fun to hear you tell your story, because it took me a long time to figure all that out, but I got to there too. And so I probably oversaw mostly the same as what you're describing you are overseeing now. Early days, it was just the clinical outcomes, our clinical research team, which is what we called the group, doing all the proof points. And like you have led them, I led them to really be integral to the sales and business development component of the business, right? People like to buy solutions that are proven to work and drive value for patients and for the system. That was the spirit of that work. We published, and so we brought that, like you have, that academic rigor to the entrepreneurial world.
It took me a little bit of time also to figure out remit for my job, but I think it went way faster because I got to learn from you and having that substantial head start. But I think chief medical officers are often, in health tech companies at least, positioned as the glue between product and growth. And you're expected to do both, but I think to be effective, you can't cover the surface area of the entire company. So you have to build an org that gives you leverage to be able to do growth enabling activities and product enabling activities.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think there are misconceptions about what the chief medical officer can and or should be. I love your indoor cats, outdoor cats thing.
But people were shocked that I could read, let alone create a spreadsheet. Like, the bar is extremely low. It's funny because, like, the way the doctors think of themselves, we have a value at Maven to walk through walls. And I think that it's not dissimilar from the value that a lot of forward deployed clinicians in the trenches, which is you go the last mile to get the prior auth and whatever you have to do to take care of the person in front of you. To a fault, we over-rotate on doing whatever is necessary for the person in front of us.
Yes.
At the expense of efficiency, at the expense of population health. That's how physicians are trained. Yeah. And yet, like, there was very low expectations in business environments of doctors when it comes to being able to put pen to paper and write a memo. And the thing is, like, medicine really does train you to have people to climb steep learning curves. So I've seen this in my peers a lot where they start off with one thing, and then because startups are like being a garage band, you're the guitar player, but you like sit in and play the drums, and it turns out you're pretty good at the drums, so you keep the drums and whatever.
Totally. Yeah. I guess so let's dig in there. So what would you say to all those teams that may be thinking about hiring a clinician executive or a chief medical officer, whatever title it may be, on how they should think about what value people like you and me can bring to the business? Because I do think you're right. There are these preconceived biases, and they're narrow and they're limited in scope and the thinking about the scope of what a clinician leader can bring.
Yeah, I'll be very honest with you. I think I talk to a lot of clinicians in health tech companies specifically who feel like they struggle to find their footing or drowning. And I would encourage the team that's recruiting one to decide the leveling, because you might not need a chief medical officer.
Yes.
You should figure out like your stage of business and whether it's aligned. I joined Maven like midstream, not at the very beginning, and there's pros and cons. As chief medical officer, we've always had clinicians, obviously, and then I think every digital health company has this challenge that I equate to being like, you're looking for an expert in this thing that's only been around for a minute. Imagine it being like 2005 and you needed a social media expert with 10 years of work experience. It's not possible.
Yeah.
And so like you do have to take a leap of faith. But my strong advice always is that clinicians are more than subject matter experts.
Yes.
And if you're only hiring a subject matter expert or a trust me, I'm a doctor person, then you're not using your resources wisely. And so both in structuring the role and positioning the role and in recruiting for the role,
yes,
if you're going to hire a doctor, you should make sure that they're a strategist and to varying degrees a business operator, at least with the potential to become one.
Yes. Yeah. So what do you think are the characteristics those people should be looking for? Because to your point, there are an increasing number, but still a small number of been there, done that clinician leaders, because the space is relatively new, right?
Yep.
It started a decade plus ago, but there were not a lot of other people around. There were some, thankfully, and they were my guides and my Sherpas. But so what are the qualities that are characteristics maybe that you brought, reflect on yourself, but that others should be looking at as clinicians trying to jump into this world, and then as hiring teams maybe thinking about pulling in great folks?
Yeah, it's interesting because I can imagine that it was pretty lonely when you started. And then I think any clinician to some degree who jumps off the prescribed railroad tracks feels lonely. Like the hardest thing for me in going from academic medicine to a startup wasn't like the apparent risk. It was the sense of identity.
Yeah.
That was by far the hardest thing. And actually, Atul Gawande gave me the best advice on this. He said, you don't always get concrete advice from him, but this was like something that really stuck with me. It was like, be intentional about what you bring with you from academia and what you leave behind. So what you make space to newly adopt. And he was really talking about it from an identity perspective, but I think the rest followed, because I think where clinicians often fail is they're used to being the experts. They work really hard and they may have a growth mindset, but they may not quite have the humility to ask the deeper why around. Yeah. For me, I felt I brought with me a strongly held sense of scientific integrity and skepticism, which comes from scientists. I left behind there are many ways of characterizing it, but like in academia, your value is being objective and saying whatever you want. In being an executive at any company, I had to learn how to grow a frontal lobe.
Yes.
My value wasn't saying literally whatever I think.
Yeah.
It was like being measured and coming in with a bias and an interest on purpose. Yeah. So that was like a really new muscle for me.
Yeah. It's interesting. I interviewed Minal Patel for this podcast earlier, and he's now the CEO of Abacus Insights. He was one of the earlier ones. So he's on a second turn as an entrepreneur and was the chief strategy officer at Horizon Blue Cross in New Jersey for many years. And so I asked him what little piece of advice and that he would give. He gave a lot of advice. He gave an hour's worth of advice, but the difference he noted was that people have an agenda in this. We have to know that people have an agenda. And so a little bit I have to have a frontal lobe. You kind of have to know in patient care, everybody's agenda is the patient gets better, the end. But in this world, everyone comes at it from a slightly different agenda. And you have to be able to kind of use your filter to navigate, what you're going to say, where and when, to meet the need of that particular conversation based on the agenda that person might be bringing to that encounter.
Totally. There's always an agenda in life more broadly, but I think that in this environment, you need to acutely perceive it to be effective and helpful. You can't run anything with, I think the lack of an agenda may be a problem in the incoming brick and mortar system, right? There's like massive inefficiencies and all this stuff. Yeah. And honestly, there is something also really pure. I remember I took my executive team at Maven. We had an offsite in Boston and we went on a tour at Mass General.
That's great.
The department chair brought us through the NICU and the labor floor, and like our chief product officer had never been in a NICU before. And the difference in culture was remarkable because you walk in, you have all these ideas of Mass General, and it's an incredible place, really well resourced, like brilliant people in it. And also, if you look at it as like an operator of a hyper growth, relatively lean company, you're like, how is this possible?
Yes.
It visibly looks very chaotic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as you go through as a patient, you feel that chaos and feel the greatness of it. And you also feel
and the thing is, you put up with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. So tell me, in your early days, it's been what, 4 years at Maven now?
Over 3 years.
A little over 3 years. So
president now.
When you came in, as you said, Kate had to take a chance on you. I felt the same way about Michael, who was our founder, who there was no proof that I was going to work out. It turned out I worked out. What were some of the challenges you faced in those early days as you were learning and growing and trying to find your way, if you don't mind sharing? And how'd you overcome them?
Like a weekend, I got immediate feedback from Kate. I was showing up on sales calls and saying that I was new. And I was like, yeah, I just got here.
Like, I don't know anything. This is like new to me.
She was like, you've been here a week. You're like a veteran now. We're good on that. No, and I think honestly, there's one way that I think about the difference. One is I spent most of my career in the public sector. And in the public sector, you have to squeeze resources out of stones, but you have a minute to solve a generational problem. There's a classic project management triangle where you have time, scope, and budget. If somebody gives you two, it fixes the third. It's like negotiating 101. If somebody tells you to do something in half as much time and you're like, you get half as much scope or you pay me twice as much. It's two possibilities.
I love it.
Yeah. And so like public sector, less resources, but you have a minute. In this world, you have access to liquidity, especially in 2021 when I joined, but you've got to turn that into shareholder value in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And it's not better or worse, but it fundamentally changes how you make decisions. And that rhythm took a second.
Yeah.
Like I bumped up against it a bit and then I learned.
Yes.
But I didn't know how to deploy that kind of capital, like from going from an NIH research grant or to this. I didn't know how to manage through layers. I didn't know what a vice president was, let alone a senior director or director. And it's amazing how much I didn't know. And also the opportunity that anyone at a startup, but particularly a clinician, has to grow with the business. I think the other thing that's hard about a startup is that often the person that can get you from one place to the other isn't the person to bring you to the next destination.
Yeah.
But if you are humble and you really lean into learning opportunities, you will grow with the company.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I've seen people who can grow with the company and I've seen people who cannot. So it's also some people can manipulate, I don't mean manipulate in a bad way, that can be malleable and learn. And others are right for right stages of companies. And we see that with CEOs all the time. There's no reason that wouldn't be the case for clinical leaders as well. I think several CEOs over the course of our journey at Able to, and Maven has had Kate throughout the journey, right? So it just depends on the person and their skill set and ability.
And I think part of the partnership, honestly, with Kate too, is like Kate is a phenomenal CEO and business leader. And also every day we grow and every day she's running the biggest company she's ever run before.
Yeah.
She knows that. And also has this amazing growth mindset that I think is really helpful. It's probably there are different capacities for learning and growth, but part of it is probably like constitution too. Like apparently the best cellists are not the ones with the most innate talent. They're the ones that are willing to practice when everybody else is willing to wants to throw in the towel.
Yeah.
I think that medicine selects for people like that too. But I think change and learning and growth is hard and painful. So you have to be the kind of person who is like willing to lean into it a little bit more than.
Yeah. Yeah. You use the word humility and talk about Kate and talk about your own experience and where clinicians need to draw on a little bit of that humility. And I love that word. I have thought a lot about success coming from a combination of expertise and confidence on the one hand, and humility and willingness to learn on the other. My most favorite leaders, I think, have demonstrated the ability to balance those two ends of that spectrum. And as clinicians, sometimes we come in with I'm the expert and insufficient amount of humility. But yeah, I'd love to hear more about how that's played out for you and the folks around you.
There are times where you are the expert. Let's talk about the things that the chief medical officer can do uniquely.
Yeah.
So I think that's misunderstood too, because you end up playing in these amalgamation of roles, and there's no one way to build a business, and there's no one way to structure an organization. Yeah. There are many ways, right? There are things that are growth enabling that I do, but another person could theoretically do. But at the end of the day, you are in many cases like the moral voice of the company, the product. Your job sometimes is to be the keel. You have to be like very judicious too in how you deploy this, but there are times where it's your job to be like, pump the brakes, or maybe hit the gas, usually pump the brakes.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like we're not the experts in everything. That's the humility piece. But then there are things that like we have to have the confidence and the conviction to fully own too. And there are so many hard choices that pressure you against this deeply held clinical value around integrity. Like the things I'm most proud of at Maven are like not just what we built, but how we've chosen to build it. Like there's so many ways of making money in healthcare. Most of them are extractive.
Yeah.
They don't create value. They extract value out of the value chain.
Totally.
And it's easier to make money that way. And especially if you're a startup, and we've chosen at key moments, like not to. And like, there's a part of owning your identity as a clinician that requires like really deep conviction sometimes too.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I understand what you're saying. Like oftentimes doing less is the way to be efficient and make money. But if you can understand that doing more of the right things can also be a path to profitability and company growth. Yeah.
The easiest way to make money in healthcare is like someone is paying somebody else. So a payer is paying a clinic or whatever. A purchaser is sponsoring a benefit, let's say, in our space. And like, you're like, okay, I'm just going to take the money and then I'm going to give it to you, but I'm going to mark it up first. That's how healthcare works. But you don't have to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I like thinking about and reminding clinicians of what they bring. It's funny. For a while, I've been focused on the gaps, right? What are the gaps in what clinicians have in their skill set or their experience set that we need to fill? And there are gaps, of course, like you mentioned some of them, right? Like thinking about leading teams or managing layers or understanding like the org structures. And there's so much that we are not exposed to. We have faux management skills in medicine because we're in teams. But I was reminded in a recent conversation to refocus on the strengths that clinicians bring. I think you've pointed out several of them, right? Like this sense of integrity, this holding on to sort of the patient as the North Star in all that you do, and like in terms of your purpose as an organization. I also think about leading in chaos, right? Like entrepreneurship is just chaos all day, every day.
Yeah.
You've probably run codes. I've run codes. Like we've been in hell. And we know how to handle hell.
First of all, there's a resilience that comes to that. Second of all, talk about chaos. Most people don't know this, but you call a code blue, like 50 people run into the room and someone has to step up and be in charge and organize that in like where every second counts. And there's not a doctor that comes through training that hasn't done that.
Correct.
And that's what I mean about the conviction skill. Like when it truly counts, there is a ability that is trained into clinicians to step up with conviction and just take the ball.
Correct.
In a trustworthy manner and move it down the field.
Yeah, I love it. I also like to remind folks that we're diagnosticians at heart. I've realized this about myself. You can throw all the business chaos in front of me and my brain will naturally go, okay, like I bucket it into the categories and then, okay, now we're going to test X, Y, and Z. We're going to do a time limited course of care or whatever test we're going to run. And then we see what the outcome is and we reevaluate and deviate. Like we think like that as clinicians naturally. And it's super applicable in the business environment to be able to sit back and see the complexity and be able to order it in your brain.
Yes.
Imagine
And,
the same skill.
1,000%. And also the ability to understand causal inference. Like, not to cast aspersions, but like a canonical product leader from a technology SaaS company, like they're trained. First of all, nobody goes to product management school. So there's a lot of heterogeneity. They're not a monolith. But like they're usually trained to think in very like modes of thought that are complementary to the ways that clinicians think, but also fundamentally different. Like clinicians think in terms of central tendency.
Say more about that. What do you mean?
Epidemiology is about like measuring bucket A and bucket B and comparing the average.
Yeah.
Product people always think about not the central tendency, but the margin. They're like, put on MVP and then incrementally make it better. And like their brains are structured differently from ours. And so that creates a translation challenge sometimes, but it also creates great complementarity when like there are times where their tendency is to put things in a couple buckets and count what's in bucket A and bucket B and be like, we should go with bucket A because there's more things in it. And you're like, let's like figure out if the reason that there are more things in bucket A is why we think it is. And it's like that, like clinicians have to get down to the root cause.
Yes.
People don't, but I think that we have a very complementary way of chasing that down.
Yeah. So you're getting at a topic I would love to shift into, which is working as a clinician executive with non-clinician leaders in your business. We've all, those of us who have done it, have had to figure out like how to find those points of complementarity, how to partner, how to work together. There were certainly times in my career where that did not work out. And we did a lot of talking over one another, misunderstanding what the other was trying to do or how they were trying to communicate. You've held this clinical product role. I had a role like that at Able to and had to really work closely with my product technology design partners, oversaw data, like I had to work closely. So would love to hear about your experience and how you've worked with your non-clinician peers and what's been hard and what has been great and how you've worked together.
I think this is probably the biggest call to humility for the clinician who chooses to do this. I think what we have to understand is, to a certain degree, like we are strangers in a foreign land or whatever, but we chose to go to the foreign land. And so at the beginning, I think I made the mistake of where there were translation issues. So yeah, I'll learn your language, but you got to learn mine. And I've actually come to a different point of view where I appreciate it, but I'm also like, the one who chose to go visit a foreign land. I'd be like going to France and telling them they have to speak English. Like, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And I think, first of all, I think there can and should be a healthy tension in executives, between senior leaders, and between disciplines and areas of expertise. That's how you create the best products and services and businesses at the end of the day. I should not get along with her. I always get along with our chief product officer, but we shouldn't always see eye to eye.
Sure.
And over time, I've learned this is the 5 dysfunctions of a team or whatever, but like healthy conflict comes from this like base of trust.
Yes. I agree.
And so there's something in how you establish that trust in both directions, how you earn it and by being trustworthy, and also how you like intentionally seek it out.
Yeah.
So that was not a linear path for me, but I think a big part of thriving at Maven and loving what I do is that I'm in a place where I can have productive conflict and tension with my growth peer and my product peer. Yeah.
I love that. We used to have a phrase at Able to that just assume positive intent. People are coming at it. So many of us were coming at it for the right reasons. The mission, we were aligned on mission. We were aligned on our North Star. But yeah, we got a little sometimes lost in translation of, well, as you say, like someone speaking French, someone speaking English. But if you go back to first principles, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here? I think that helps. And I use the term psychological safety a lot. There were times where I did not create psychological safety. What do you mean you want to not ask about the past medical history and the medications in our encounters, right? People didn't understand. So you kind of have to come at it from a different lens. And when you can establish the trust and the curiosity and the willingness to grow together, it's a completely different.
It ties into what we're talking about in growing a frontal lobe.
Yes.
And being mindful of the agenda and adhering to it. But you got to pause and be like, the growth function, like their mandate is to grow.
Yeah.
The product has to build that. And so they both experience different pain, and that's where they're coming from. And
Correct.
as the chief medical officer, you're often like the glue and like the nexus of all that tension.
Yeah.
Part of it is like learning how to hold that.
Yeah. By the way, I'll push back a little on like we clinicians being the only ones entering a foreign land. I think we are, but I also think like there's a lot of non-healthcare people who have other expertise who are entering our land. And so actually, I think it's finding the middle. We're both foreigners in one another's land, and we both have to help one another find some common language to be able to convey our respective expertise to one another. That's where I think the magic happens.
Well, the way I would characterize it is I don't disagree with that. I also think that in almost every leadership role, there's like the ostensible thing that you're doing and then the thing that's underneath that thing. So like in politics, why bother unless you have issues that you care about and ideally a policy platform. So as anybody following the news cycle, like there's a big economic speech that happened yesterday, like, but that's not what wins or loses the election. What loses the election, like what November 6th will come down to, like, coalition building and building media channels. And right, so there's an effort that has nothing to do with constructing the policies. In this world that we're in, like why bother unless you have a product or service that's valuable to people?
Yeah.
Also, like the banking analyst has other concerns that are almost agnostic to that. And so the foreign land for us is being mindful of the fact that you need to build products that are valuable to people. And that's like your mandate as the chief medical officer. And that has to live in a construct of like total addressable market, year-over-year growth and gross margins. And that's the foreign land.
Totally.
Your point though, like there are plenty of people that aren't steeped in healthcare. And one of your most important jobs is to represent healthcare as an industry, which is amazing. But like I liken it to people from the outside in looking at healthcare are like astronomers looking through a telescope at a planet that you've lived on your whole life.
Yes.
Right? So they make like macro observations and you're like, let me tell you what it's like to actually be here.
Exactly. And like we docs have to certainly do that with, let me take a deep breath and let me explain why it is we do the things we do, even if they seem completely illogical and completely alien and no one should ever do this way. Yes. Like we also find ourselves defending the stupidity sometimes, which is a tough position to be in.
Yeah. And actually my biggest stretches here is when you're a professor and you're teaching in an academic environment, you adhere to evidence and you like to think that you take a critical lens to evidence. Also, when your aperture gets widened, you realize that a lot of things are the way they are because of historical accidents or because of lack of evidence, which is not the same thing as evidence that something doesn't work.
Yeah.
We don't have a captive audience in a digital paradigm. We don't have a waiting room. So we have to meet people where they are to a much larger degree than the doctor in a white coat does in the office. And so I've also had to humble myself around like, if you type Mucinex into TikTok right now, you will learn nothing about upper respiratory infections and you'll learn a ton about fertility.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I can go super deep on that. But basically, like, it turns out it works on mucus everywhere. And cervical mucus is the only liquid barrier between the inside and outside and selectively decides which sperm gets through. Anyway, during COVID... I
did not know anything about that. It's fascinating.
Yeah, during COVID, like an influencer took Mucinex for her COVID symptoms and got pregnant and turned it into a trending topic. It turns out there's an evidence base for it, but it's really limited, but it also doesn't hurt. And so I remember a moment where our team went in and my objective was to knock this down as misinformation. But then we kind of did a review and we're like, it doesn't hurt. It's not exactly wrong. Maybe it helps with CF heterozygotes. I don't know. But like knocking this down as misinformation doesn't help. And it probably hurts. And that's a very different posture than I would have taken in my last seat.
Yes. So interesting. In the last few minutes we have together, maybe just some quick questions. This one might not be quick, but maybe. I think we think of work and life as these distinct ends of the spectrum. I'd love to just hear, I'm asking these questions in an unbiased way to men and women alike. You have a family, you have a spouse who has a wonderful career in her own right, kids. Like, how have you navigated all that you do, entrepreneurship, academia, family, What are the tools that you use to kind of keep it all in order? Or maybe it's not all in order. That's honest.
Not all in order. So I think
Honest too.
I think the first thing is like, it's super messy, and whatever people see periodically on social media is never the reality on the ground. I don't have a single friend or family member that has everything together all the time. I think
a good reminder.
Oh my gosh. I also think that it's actually easier for me to find, we'll call it work-life balance in this seat than as, I think, like in the practice of medicine, whether in private practice or in academic practice, I think that we all, we work in teams, but we have this sense, which I'm not sure is totally true, that everything is on our shoulders.
Yeah.
Like, I really believe that wholeheartedly, that everything is on my shoulders. And
I think it's real. I don't think that's artificial. When you're in patient care, like you hold all your patients in you, in your heart, in your mind, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's a weight that you do carry.
It's a huge weight, but you also live your life with that weight.
Yeah.
And make decisions with that weight. And I think that there's an element of it, let's just say that I now run like a large team of people that I am responsible for the culture. And so like, I've got to let people sign off. So I've got to model that and sign off too. And also for them to be empowered through 3 or 4 layers of management, I've got to delegate and I've got to trust them to do their job. Our thing is like in medicine, maybe it's because of the weight, and it's because in a safety critical system, you need redundancy. But I literally this morning watched the intern ask the junior resident a question, who then asked the senior resident, who then asked the chief resident, who then asked the attending. And the attending was like in the order entry system, like double checking the intern. And like, that's how we work. But like, you would never run a business that way.
No way. You got to learn to let people do their jobs.
That's so different. You learn to let people do their jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Yeah. And then that's part of living better too. This point about delegation is so key. Yeah. That was hard for me at the outset. At the outset, it was just me able to. So there was no one to delegate to. And then later it became a necessity to delegate, and it felt uncomfortable. And then later yet, I was able to delegate, and I'm like, I have won the jackpot. Like the fact that like I have a team that knows what they're doing and can run without me peering over their shoulders and micromanaging. This is how this should be. It took me a while though to get through those phases of learning how to be a good leader.
I think the worst thing that you can do in my current setting is be a micromanager, especially like at baseline, but it is how we work as doctors.
Yeah.
We micromanage everything.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So do you think that shift in the way you have to work has enabled you to live in a different way?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's a better way to live.
Yeah.
And I honestly think it's up for debate whether that degree of micromanagement in medicine is a good or bad thing. I think on first principles, like, yes, people need to be safe. Yes, people need to be trained.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not exactly like a paragon of a positive work environment in medicine. We're the opposite of that, to be totally honest. So maybe we should chill a bit.
Completely agree. Completely. In the last minute or two, anything I didn't ask you that you want to make sure to touch on, or any last bit of advice that you would want to convey to others coming up the chain, or folks who might have just entered the entrepreneurial or business world and trying to find their way? What would you say?
I think when you're trying to find your way, it's often hard to know if you're on the right path. But if you're compelled by trying to make healthcare better because the current state of healthcare makes you crazy mad, you're going to be on the right path.
Yeah.
That's the motivation for this. And you can't go wrong if that's your motivation. Like, I will talk to literally anybody who has an idea to make healthcare better, because and it's hard because usually the people that train you or your mentors have not chosen to go down this path.
Yes.
That may change though. I am showing up at the medical school and the School of Public Health. And the School of Public Health 3 years ago, nobody wanted to join a startup. Mm-hmm. And now everybody wants to join a startup.
Interesting.
I think it's awesome because we don't have very many public health trained people in startups today. And if we did, imagine what the world would be like.
It's great.
So yeah, I think that's it. I think the water is warm, and believe in yourself. And Rena, I think this is such an important topic and platform. I hope a lot of people listen to it.
I appreciate it. We'll end with that. I so appreciate you. It has been so fun to watch your journey from academia and clinical doc to entrepreneurship. And you've had such a loud and proud voice in pushing for change. And we didn't even get into all of it. The work at Cost of Care, your work with Christy Turlington, the now talking about menopause in addition to other women's health issues, which is so key. So just, I want to use the word proud. I have no ownership over your career at all, but it's just fun to watch. And thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you, Rena.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Leadership Rounds, where clinician executives share wisdom and insights on what it means to be an exceptional leader in healthcare. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe, comment, and share with your friends and fellow leaders in healthcare. Join us next time for another dose of leadership wisdom. Until then, I'm Dr. Rena Pandey. Thanks for listening.